Hey guys, this video will talk about automatic stabilizers and how they affect the government budget. Now, automatic stabilizers, also known as built-in stabilizers, are what the name suggests. They are built in to the budget and they affect two things: one, taxation, and two, welfare payments. So automatic stabilizers in the budget are taxation and welfare payments. Now, the definition of an automatic stabilizer: they are built in components of the budget which are either taxation or welfare payments, and operate in a counter-cyclical, so against the cyclical nature of the business pattern. It's a counter-cyclical way to help stabilize aggregate demand. So we know that budgetary policy is an aggregate demand management policy, and these automatic stabilizers are built-in components of the budget and operate in a counter-cyclical way to help stabilize aggregate demand, so that it is not too big or it is not too low. Okay, so we're going to look at how automatic stabilizers act in both a downturn or recession and in inflationary upswings. Okay. So we're going to look at this in terms of the business cycle, and we know that the x-axis is time, and we know that the y-axis is GDP. Now, as we know, the business cycle acts in a very wavy-like fashion. So we're going to look at this as the business cycle, and we're going to put a trend line through as well. So that's the trend line. Trend line, and the yellow being the business cycle. So we're going to look at how taxation and welfare payments automatically adjust the aggregate demand of the economy so as to make these booms here, or these recessions here, as close to the trend line as possible, so that we avoid having large booms or very, very low or bad recessions. So let's take the example where the economy is at a boom. So what this means is that aggregate demand is high. So aggregate demand is C plus I plus D, or G plus net exports. And we know that when aggregate demand is high, because aggregate demand equals GDP equals Y, which is income, according to the circular flow, when aggregate demand is high, we have high incomes, because we need money to spend, and when we spend a lot due to high aggregate demand, that automatically means that we have a high income. Because we have what is known as a progressive tax system, especially for income tax, we know that as our income increases, we'll pay a higher proportion of our income in tax. And so what this means when we pay a higher proportion of our income in tax is that taxation here will automatically increase because we're paying a higher proportion of tax. So when taxation increases, that means we have less money to spend. I'm going to note here, when taxation increases, we have less money to spend. This is because our disposable income, the money that we can dispose of, decreases. And this automatically happens regardless of the discretionary input of the treasurer. So what this means is that when taxation increases, aggregate demand would automatically be decreased, or decrease relative to how much it would have been without progressive tax rates. And also we must note that when incomes are high, this means that unemployment is approaching full unemployment. So we know that when aggregate demand is high, that means GDP is high, income is high, and therefore businesses would then hire more workers so as to meet the aggregate demand of the economy. And so that's how the economy moves towards full employment. And as we know, as people become employed, there is less need for welfare payments. And since welfare payments are a component of consumption, I'm just going to note C here, consumption spending would also go down because of a decrease in welfare payments paid out to the community because of higher employment rates. So as we know that consumption being a component of aggregate demand here, C plus I plus G plus net X, we can see that consumption will go down either 1 by a decrease in welfare payments and 2 by an increase in taxation. So what this means is that aggregate demand would be slowed, and therefore this would move back to the trend line here. And that's how automatic stabilizers work. We're going to look at what happens in times of a recession here. So we have a recession or a trough, or a period of economic downswing. So this is where this is characterized by low inflation and high unemployment. And this all is because of low aggregate demand. We have a low aggregate demand because of a decrease in confidence perhaps, but a general slowdown in economic activity. So what happens when there is a low aggregate demand and high unemployment is that there is a smaller tax base for which the government can tax. So more people are unemployed, and therefore more people are earning less than the threshold of 18,200, and therefore taxation rates, I'm just going to put this in orange, taxation rates would actually decrease. Similarly, when people are unemployed, they have claims to welfare payments here, and so welfare payments will increase. And all this acts to increase consumption because taxation has decreased. This also acts to increase consumption. And when consumption increases, this would again force a move back to this trend line or steady rate of economic growth here. So that's how automatic stabilizers are built-in stabilizers and help budgetary policy to counter-cyclically act to help stabilize aggregate demand. And counter-cyclical means it acts against the cyclical pattern of the business cycle at that time. So when the business cycle, or when aggregate demand is high, taxation acts to counter-cyclically decrease aggregate demand. And when aggregate demand is low, automatic stabilizers will act to increase aggregate demand by decreasing taxation and increasing welfare payments. And all this helps the government achieve the 5 economic goals, and to help the rate of economic growth to be steady along this trend line here.